Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Caithness Amateur Dramatics Society tasting. Tonight I'm going to do an Octave tasting. It's going to be 5 whiskies from the Duncan Taylor Octave range that were released in 2023. We have a quite a selection tonight, and we're going to have an Octave Miltonduff, 2009, 14-year-old. An Octave Aultmore 2008 14-year-old, an Octave Iconic Speyside 2010 12-year-old, an Octave Glentauchers 2008 14-year-old, and an Octave Laphroaig 2011 11-year-old. So the Octave that Duncan Taylor do is a small cask, typically holding something around about 100 litres of spirit. And what they do is they take it from the original cask and then put it into this smaller cask. They have a cooperage themselves where they can actually construct these small sherry octave casks. So these are all octaves, are all casks that have previously held sherry. Um, they break down larger sherry casks and rebuild them as these small octaves. And the idea is that the smaller cask has a greater contact with the liquid and a faster period. So, if they put the original whiskey in an octave for 3 months, it will be a single uh, first fill octave. Uh, 6 months, it'll be a second fill octave, and 9 months will be a third fill octave. So the longer they leave it in, once they had it in something in it before, then the sherry is a little bit diluted, and so this would, if you leave it in for 9 months, have the sherry bolted back up again. So we're going to start off with the Octave Miltonduff from 2009. Uh, and The Miltonduff distillery was founded by Andrew Peary and Robert Bain in 1824. It had previously operated illicitly on the site since the turning of the 19th century. But following the passing of the Excise Act, Peary and Bain established the distillery as a legitimate business operation. After debuting to a successful start in 1866, the distillery was purchased by William Stewart. In 1895, Thomas Yule and Company became part owners of the site, and a few years later, Yule went on to completely control the distillery. In 1936, Thomas Yule and Company sold the site on to Hiram Walker. Uh, The year before, Hiram Walker had acquired George Ballantyne's and Sons, thanks to the enormous profits that they had made during Prohibition by smuggling alcohol into America. The company had decided to expand their operations into Scotland to ensure that they would have enough single malt to compete with demand. And following their acquisition, Hiram Walker immediately transferred the management over to Ballantyne's. In 1964, a pair of Lomond stills were installed at the distillery to start producing the Mostelli single malt. Ballantyne's were responsible for developing the design of the Lomond single malt pot stills, which was one of the reasons that these pot stills were installed at the site. In 1974, a major reconstruction was launched and the number of pot stills was increased. However, in 1981, the Lomond stills were removed, therefore eliminating the production of Mostelli. The Lomond stills were replaced by regular pot stills to keep up their production levels. In 1986, most of the Hiram Walker stocks were acquired by Allied Domecq, and in 1987 they acquired the rest of the company. In 2005, Pernod Ricard acquired Miltonduff through the corporate merger of Allied and Pernod. So Miltonduff Distillery has an impressive production capacity of 5.5 million litres. It used to be Allied Distillers' largest distillery. Even following Pernod Ricard's takeover of Allied Domecq, the distillery still has one of the largest capacities in the group, with only Glenlivet's capacity being greater. The water used in production is taken from the Black Burn, as Mostawi was produced in a pair of pot stills in the site. That production capacity has been lost since the closure of the site of Mostawi. 6 pot stills are used in the production of Miltonduff. The 3 wash stills each have an 18,000 litre capacity, and the 3 spirit stills have a capacity of 17,500 litres. Mostawi was distilled using a pair of Lohmann stills, which had a regular pot at the bottom of the still, but the straight necks of the stills consisted of 3 plates, which could be used separately, which allowed a variety of different flavours of malt to be made without having to construct new stills. The malt used in production of Mostawi was lightly peated, which resulted in a soft, smoky taste, whilst the malt used in the production of Miltonduff was completely unpeated. The malt for both single malts is sourced from was sourced from an industrial source in Speyside. Mostawi, or Miltonduff rather, has an extensive warehouse complex with both dunnage and rack warehouses. The distillery uses a combination of American white oak and sherry cask in which the single malt is aged. So what kind of whisky do we get with Miltonduff? There's 2 official single malts released from the Miltonduff distillery, Miltonduff and Mostawi. It's released several other official expressions of Miltonduff, including a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, although these mostly date from the 1970s, 80s and 90s. In addition to these official releases, there have been several independent releases of Miltonduff. Gordon and MacPhail have released a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, both of which were released on behalf of the distillery in a semi-official manner. Additionally, Douglas Lang has released a 22-year-old bottling. The distillery never released an official bottling of Mostawi, as the single malt was launched to be used as a component in the Hiram Walker blends. There were, however, a small number of independent bottlings released of Mostawi, which included a 30-year-old bottling by Duncan Taylor and a 12 and 20-year-old bottling by Gordon and MacPhail. Mostawi was used as a major component in several blends that were owned by Hiram Walker, including the Ballantyne's blends. I can't tell you an awful lot about what this whisky was matured in, other than it's 3 months in an Octave. It's an Octave Miltonduff 2009, cask number 8336733. It was distilled in 2009 and bottled in 2023. It's a 14-year-old and it was bottled at 53.8%. I don't know, this is the only whisky tonight, I don't know how many bottles were made available of this. But let's see where we are with the Octave Miltonduff. So you get these little sample bottles from Duncan Taylor. They do a lot of whisky tastings, and it's worth investigating the Spirits Embassy, their retail branch, to have a look and see what they have. And they do videos with these, and they have Ian Logan as their brand ambassador. Sometimes with the Duncan Taylor ones, you get Fergus Simpson, who is an excellent knowledge on whiskey. So it's quite dark in colour. Non-chill filtered, natural colour, and it's got lovely tears. And it's got lovely dark red rhubarb, crumble, and custard. It's a lovely start there. Orange marmalade, roasted hazelnut and clove. Cinnamon swirls, cocoa powder. Malt loaf. And it's sort of cherries, the kind of cherries you get on the top of an Empire biscuit. Glassy cherries. Raisins and plum jam. And it has pleasant notes of leather, honey, red wine, and caramel. And I do get this sort of menthol wood mixture, linseed, brown sugar, and foresty too, evergreen boughs. And there's some floral notes and a light perfume too. And it leans towards black licorice. Quite elegant, quite floral, and fresh fruit, and a little bit of vanilla as well, and a touch of spice. And try the mouth. I'm not sure whether to drink this or have it as a dessert. It's like a rhubarb panna cotta with the sherry providing a gentle perfumed spice note. Black pepper, caramel, and milk chocolate. And you get cocoa nibs and treacle and a sort of menthol cough syrup. It's very creamy and it tastes a bit like butter, maple syrup, and milk chocolate. It's a lovely mouthfeel here. And now I'm getting the Miltonduff fruit with cigar leaves, red apple skins, blood oranges, mocha coffee, and cardamom. And it's lovely and spicy. And the finish lingers for a while and gently fades. It's quite long and it stays spicy for a good while. It really warms the palate. I'm going to try 4 drops of water in this. I've got my little glass pipette here. I'm using Calvatin spring water tonight. Sometimes I use the tins that you can see from the Isle of Lewis. But I'm just using bottled Carvatin spring water. I think it's Finnish spring water. And yeah, you get that lovely Scotch mist there. And you do get that much fruitier green gages, white grapes, and icing sugar. Try them out. There's some chili, Pontefract cakes, chocolate croissants. There's figs and dates too. And it's a bit of funk. Always find Miltonduff just a little towards the funky side, almost a dirty whiskey. So this is a proper pudding dram. You could pair it with fruit or a cheese course, and it would shine. And I'd recommend buying a bottle, but with such a small output, I suspect there's few left, if any. It's a great dram, full of bittersweet flavours, and at 53.8%, it didn't hit as hard as I'd expected. Went down smoothly. For me, the nose and palate are quite different from one another. The nose does hide the experience the palate brings, and on the palate, I found the fruits I've had with other Miltonduffs. It also develops nicely. I really enjoyed this whiskey and would have I like to have had a bottle, to be honest. So we'll cleanse your palate. Tonight on Nairn's Oatcakes from Edinburgh. The next dram is Octave Aultmore from 2008, 14-year-old, Cask 95356669, 54.9% ABV, and it spent 9 months in the Octave, so it's a third fill Octave. So Aultmore was founded in 1895 by Alexander Edward, who also had association with the Benrinnes distillery. Back in his time, he was one of the bigger distillery owners. The distillery was closed during World War I due to the food shortage and was sold afterwards to John Dewar and Sons Limited. After another few changes of owners, the distillery ended up with Bacardi, who gave the management back to John Dewar. The output of the distillery rose over the years to about 2 million litres of pure alcohol. Aultmore produces with 4 stills, and the water burn is called Ochenderan. The 2 wash stills have a capacity of about 15,500 litres, and the spirit stills are also very big, with a capacity of about 15,000 litres. Unfortunately, the malting floors were closed in 1968. So Aultmore whiskey has had almost no standard bottlings until 2014. So the unofficial standard bottling was the flora and fauna bottling. There were a lot of independent bottlings of Aultmore. The major part of the production must therefore go into the blend industry, and Aultmore malt is mostly included in the Dewar's blend, as the distillery belongs to the John Dewar and Sons Company, part of Bacardi. Also worth mentioning is the Old Perth blended malt. The main ingredient of this blended malt is Aultmore. So this one was aged in 14 years in oak cask, then spent the final 9 months in a sherry Octave cask. It's one of only 81 bottles and bottled in 2023 at a cask strength of 54.9% and non-chill filtered and naturally coloured. So let's see what we've got here. This one's a bit lighter than the Miltonduff was. And it has tears, but it's not as viscous or as sticky as the Miltonduff was. It's quite a pleasant nose. There's some distinct sherry notes with a spice in the background, like an old nutmeg. Quite intense sherry, red apples, vanilla, and crumbly cake. There's no oak though, and the sherry smells slightly sulfuric. You get cake batter, vanilla, and it's quite spicy. We'll try this on the mouth. It's quite drying as you suck your way through it, with a spicy note that's almost ginger. The sherry note does come through. It's quite pleasant, sweet and smooth. And you get caramel, red apple, crumb cake, vanilla, and a hint of oak. And sherry and s'mores, stewed berries, custard, caramelized sugar, toffee ice cream. It's sweet, creamy, spicy, and you do get some honey there as well. And the finish is long lasting and dry with intense but cheap sherry. It's got slight sulfuric notes and a lot of oak and a sweetish, spicy herbs. In the mouth, it's very rich and oily, dense and syrup-like, but there's a hard sulfured note to be sure. Some concentrated apple juice. It's got an oily body with sweet flavour impressions. I'm going to try 5 drops of water in this. Oh, yeah, he's got classic Scotch mist again. So yeah, you get honey, dark fruits, uh, chocolate, and it's quite spicy. And on the mouth, get the honey, dark fruits, chocolate, spicy, sweet. It's creamier, and you get chocolate and vanilla fruit, and a sort of quite bold pepperiness. And the finish with water is medium length, sweet and spicy. Well, I think with this Aultmore, the cask has butchered this whiskey. It's sweet like the cask wasn't properly emptied, and it's sulfured. There's not much spirit character coming through here. There's a touch of plasticiness, lots of sherry character, but not in the way I'd want, which is a bit of a shame. So we'll have another New oat cake. So third up, we have a Octave iconic Speyside 2010 12-year-old cask number 2934523, bottled at 53.3%, so spent 3 months in the Octave. So iconic Speyside. Well, sometimes distilleries pass their, or independent bottlers buy from distilleries casks of whiskey, but they're not actually allowed to bottle them under the name of the distillery. You can see iconic Orkneys, iconic Speyside, iconic Islas, Enigma Islas, Enigma Highlands, and it takes a bit of detective work to find out which distillery the whiskey is actually from. But I can tell you, through a bit of research, that this iconic Speyside is in fact a Glenfarclas, which I actually really do like Glenfarclas, and I think it does well in sherry casks. But it is a sherry cask whiskey. So this distillery, it started when the farmer Robert Hay built a distillery on the Recklerich farm in 1836. On June the 8th, 1865, John Grant became tenant of the farm and bought the distillery for a price of £511, 19 shillings. He was 60 years old and married to Barbara, with whom he had 6 children. He was a successful farmer and breeded Aberdeen Angus cattle on several farms that he owned. While he stayed at his Blairfindie farm, his distant cousin John Smith cared for the Recklerich farm and the distillery, supported by John's son George Grant. John Smith left Glenfarclas in 1870 to build another distillery, Cragganmore. When John Grant died in 1889, his son George became owner of the farm and distillery, but he also passed away just 1 year later, leaving Glenfarclas to his own sons, John and George, and his widow, Elsie. When whiskey boomed in the 1890s, the brothers decided to expand and went into a partnership with Pattison, Elder and Company, which was ill-fated and nearly led to a financial ruin of the Grants. During 15 hard years, the distillery was saved and the company was turned into J&G Grant. But John retired early and George led the family business on his own. The The fourth generation of Grants stepped into business with George Scott Grant, who was chairman of Glenfarclas for 52 years until he died in 2002. Thanks to him in laying down a big stock of casks and deciding not to give that much whisky away to blenders as had been done before, is the reason why Glenfarclas has hands on great old casks. John L.S. Grant followed his father George S. Grant as chairman in 2002. At that time, he had already been working in the company for nearly 30 years. He personally selects a Spanish sherry cask that will mature the Glenfarclas whisky and sources the malted barley for the production. The family cask releases are due to him. When George's son George S. Grant joined Glenfarclas in 2000, it was the sixth generation to rule the family business. He worked as Glenfarclas brand ambassador still and introduces whisky to old and new markets. The production at Glenfarclas is in the old traditional way, and half of the 30 employed people are engaged in milling, mashing, distilling, and in the warehouses. Production takes place 20 hours a day in 3 shifts. Traditional craftsmanship, the shape of the still, the quality of the oak cask, and a perfect selection and blending of the mature whisky make up the secret of Glenfarclas whisky, which is, to be exact, no secret, because the distillery is open to the public and you can look behind the scenes. There are 3 wash stills, 29.6 hundred litres, 29.6 thousand litres rather, 3 spirit stills, 25,000 litres at Glenfarclas. First distillation in the wash still leads to low wines with 23% ABV. Second distillation is split into foreshots, hearts, and feints, and the heart of one distillation will approximately deliver 4,000 litres with a 68% ABV. The pot stills of Glenfarclas are directly fired with gas, which is a very traditional method. Rummagers, which are revolving chains, are there to make sure there's no residue burning in the bottom of the stills. Since the 1970s, the malting isn't done in the distillery itself. Malt is delivered and stored in 11 big silos that have a capacity of 330 tons each. After milling the malt to grist in a ratio of 15% husk, 80% grits, and 5% flour, the mill does 6 tons per hour. This is then placed in the mash tun and mixed with hot spring water. First spilling is done with water at 64 degrees centigrade to wash the sugar out. The sweet water, called wort, is pumped out and a second filling with 78 degrees centigrade follows. The water of the third filling with 80 degrees centigrade just contains a small amount of sugar and serves as the first filling of the next mash. The wort is pumped into coolers to achieve a temperature of 20 degrees centigrade, which is an ideal temperature for the yeast to care for fermentation. The draft that is left when the wort is pumped out through sieves is taken from the local farmers as cattle feed. The mash tun of Glenfarclas is one of the biggest in the Scottish whisky industry, with a diameter of 10 metres and can pick up about 16.5 tons. The whole progress of mashing takes about 11 to 12 hours, which includes cleaning as well. When the wort is cooled down, it's pumped into the 12 washbacks of Glenfarclas that have a capacity of 45,000 litres each and are made of stainless steel. The cultured distiller's yeast is added in a ratio of 1% and ferments for about 50 hours. When fermentation ends, the resulting wash has an alcohol content of about 8% ABV. Before being filled into casks, the new spirit is reduced to 63.5% ABV using spring water. Glenfarclas uses Spanish sherry casks to mature its spirit and stores them in dunnage warehouses, 3 stacks high, with earth floors and stone walls in a very traditional style. After maturation, Glenfarclas whisky is bottled at Broxburn Bottlers, not far from Edinburgh, and Glenfarclas bottles at Natural Colour. So Glenfarclas whisky. Glenfarclas literally means Glen of Green Grassland, but for many whisky lovers it means sherry. The distillery is situated in the heart of Speyside, just 5 miles south of Aberlour, and it traditionally matures in sherry casks. And this core theme wasn't changed, even though sherry casks have become more and more expensive. And the range of single malts from Glenfarclas is wide and goes from 10-year-olds to 40-year-old releases. Its Glenfarclas whisky is full-bodied and presents aromas of dried fruits, sherry, honeycomb, butterscotch, light peat, nuts, marzipan, sometimes less of the one, sometimes more of the other, depending on the release you choose. With their Glenfarclas 105, they bottle a single malt with 60% ABV, which is cask strength, although it's no single cask release. The most famous releases of Glenfarclas are the family casks. One cask from every year between 1952 and 1994 was chosen, and the edition is still growing. These top whiskies are bottled at cask strength and uncoloured. So we know this is a Glenfarclas, this one. This one comes from a single sherry Octave cask, which was filled in 2010. And that smaller cask means extra wood contact. It was bottled in 2023 with no chill filtering or colouring added. And so it's one of only 75 bottles. And it's a lovely dark colour. I've had many Glenfarclases, and I really do rate it very well. And it's got tears, but they're quite thin tears. Well, they're maybe a little thicker now, quite viscous. So this one's been in the Octave for 3 months, so it's a first fill Octave. And I think if you gave me this blind, I would be going down the Glenfarclas route. I'm very familiar with Glenfarclas. And this one, you do get the fruitcake, the molasses, the nut, and the orange peel. It's really lovely and confectionery sweet. Toffee apple, roasted nuts, and there's some citrus freshness to balance it, and a touch of mint aero chocolate. And the more I nose this, the more the roasted nuts become covered in chocolate. And the apple note grows with time as well. Try them out. And you get the raisins, dried apricot, walnuts, and toffee. And just sherry. And a sweet lime pie, mixed spices, milk chocolate, and toasted oak. And the caramel, the toffee apple, and the chocolate coated nuts translate to the palate from the nose. And I like that consistency. And the spice grows to a more chili like tingle. It's not off putting in any way, just an element that evokes as the dram ages, as do the tannic, earthy flavours. And the finish is very long with nuts, baking spices, and vanilla. And you get that oaky caramel and peppery spice. And the apples vanish now. Right at the end, there is that slight drying. I think I'll add 4 drops of water to this. It's got a lovely Scotch mist. And the sherry note comes through quite strongly, and that's undercut by a fruity sweetness. It's quite a punchy taste at first, which is a little harsh before settling down. Once it's calmed down, it's quite a pleasant dram. More fruit, sultanas, and raisins, like in an Eccles cake. And the finish is shorter with water. You still get the nuts and the spices and the vanilla, peppery spice, but it's not as dry with water. It's Sherry City, this one, and I like this. It is about £100 a bottle, so it's not cheap. And for a 12-year-old Glenfarclas, it's possibly a little too pricey for me to justify, but it's a nice dram. So we'll cleanse our palates. So next we're going to an Octave Glentauchers from 2008, 14-year-old, cask number 8535929, and bottled at 53.9%. So 9 months in the Octave. One thing about the Octave series is that if you look at the cask number, the last number is how many months it's spent in the Octave. So there'll either be 3, 6, or 9. Sometimes you see them with 4 or something, but 3 tends to be first fill octave, 6 tends to be second fill octave, and 9 third fill octave. So this Glentauchers, Glentauchers is situated in Speyside, just a few miles from Keith, on the road to Craigellachie. There's no visitor centre at Glentauchers, and this may be one of the reasons why the distillery is not very well known. But the more important reason is probably there's very few bottlings of Glentauchers single malt whisky, as almost the whole production is used for blended whisky. When in 1897, James Buchanan and W.P. Lowry, a blender in Glasgow, founded the Glentauchers distillery, whisky boomed. Buchanan was not familiar with the processes of making whisky, blending and selling it, but he was confident and determined, and had chosen a very favourable place for the distillery. It was next to a main road, and the railway line was at the back that could be used by the construction of a siding. When James Buchanan and Company Limited became sole holder of Glentauchers in 1908, he already had become very successful with his Buchanan blends. 1910 saw the merge of the Buchanan and Dewar groups, and the company became part of the DCL, Distillery Company Limited. In 1923 and into 1925, extensive renovations were done. A steam engine was purchased in 1955. Electricity was installed in 1958, and 4 new stills were installed in 1965 and 66. During World War I, the distillery had closed. And then in 1985, United Distillers took over Glentauchers and mothballed it again. Allied Distillers acquired Glentauchers in 1989, and since then the distillery has been producing again. Allied Distillers became part of Pernod Ricard in 2005, and therefore Glentauchers today is under control of their British subsidiary, Chivas Brothers. So distillation at Glentauchers is done with pot stills, as is usual for malt whisky production in Scotland. But this distillery is one of the few that made some experiments with producing malt whisky by continuous distillation. This was in 1910, but experiments soon ended without satisfying results, and the distillery concentrates on its pot still distillation. The output of Glentauchers had been 1.9 million litres in 2000, although the capacity of production is about to double. Malting isn't done at Glentauchers since 1963, when the malting floors were mothballed. The water for mashing the malt is taken from Rosary Burn that flows into the River Spey. The mash tun is covered with a copper lid and can be filled with about 12 tons of malt. The 6 washbacks of Glentauchers are made of Oregon pine and have a volume of 360,000 litres altogether. 3 wash stills and 3 spirit stills are at the heart of the Glentauchers distillery. They're pear-shaped and stand side by side in the still house. So what about Glentauchers whisky? Well, Glentauchers is said to be a key component in the blends Ballantynes and Teachers. And there's another blend Glentauchers is closely related to. The founder of the distillery, James Buchanan, was the father of black and white as well. There's only been released one official bottling of Glentauchers single malt whisky by the distillery itself, which was a 15-year-old in the year 2000. Gordon and MacPhail, Duncan Taylor, Douglas Lang, and some smaller independent bottlers offer releases of this Speyside. But it's not a single malt that's often seen. In its character, Glentauchers whisky shows fruity, malty, and sweet aromas. So tonight, this one, the Glentauchers Octave Cask number 853929. Sorry, 8535,929. It's aged for 14 years in oak cask, then spent the final 9 months in a sherry Octave cask. It's a release of only 94 bottles, bottled in 2023 at cask strength, non-chill filtered and natural colour, and it's a really lovely dark colour here. This is really taking on the cask here. And this is fantastic tier. And even though this is a third fill octave, the sherry influence is quite pronounced on the whisky, the spirit. You get dark chocolate, dark stone fruit, and that sort of Christmas cake, and toasted oak, golden syrup, and cloves studded orange. It's sherry sweetness right off the bat, but it's a big old style sherry, dirty and orangey in the nose, bit of brine, and it's just a real lovely sherry matured whiskey. We'll try them out. And you get that peppery spice, a burst of peppery spice, with honeyed cinnamon and orange blossom. Sherry, dark chocolate, strawberry jam, almonds, trifle pudding. It's quite a mellow taste. Liquid caramel, some spice notes, ginger cake. Feels quite thick, heat and sweet. The spice kicks in, and this is where I feel the sherry might overwhelm it a bit, but it doesn't. Get menthol, an earthy warmth, hints of wood tannins, and a more sherry syrup mix with vanilla ice cream and Scotch minced candy. It's quite a mellow taste, nice and thick. And there's a whack of spice on the finish. Bolstered by dried cherry, tunes, cherry tunes. It's medium short. There's a nice spice note that lingers. I wish it was longer. It's got a minty oak spice and caramel, musty earth, and touches of that rich sherry. I'll try 4 drops of water in this. I put 5 in actually, sorry. And you get that lovely, lovely Scotch mist.